have my respect. Double down. Double down. 3 opponents down. Fantastic work. Outstanding.
Ladies and gents, my name is Xander, aka Deislayers, and in this video, we're going to discuss everything that you guys need to know on how to use the last word. By now, I'm sure that many of you have already heard of this phenomenal beast, and regardless of whether or not you used this thing way back in the day in Destiny 1, or you're just using it now in Destiny 2, this thing is still a fan favorite and an absolute monstrosity in the Crucible. The reason as to why this is what we're going to get into in just a couple of minutes. But before we do so, you guys have to know how to get this thing. And unfortunately, the only way to actually get this is to, of course, have the Black Armory DLC. But once you do have that, this quest step is waiting for you right there at the Drifter, and all you gotta do is complete a couple of things in PvE and PvP, and bada bing bada boom, this bad boy is going to be yours. However, despite this weapon's ferocity, it does have a couple of setbacks, and that's because this thing has a very high learning curve in order for you to actually master it, but there are a couple of ways in which you can do so, and we're going to discuss all 3 of those ways in which you can actually utilize this thing for a wide variety of environments. But on top of this, we're also going to thoroughly analyze all the deficits of the weapon, because once you guys understand that via the weapon's bloom effect, ADSing, and hip firing, then you can actually recognize how to overcome that, and once this is done, the last word is truly going to annihilate, decimate, and eradicate every guardian in your path. To find out how all these things are being done, the only thing left to do is to eviscerate that notification button, and let's jump right into the video. Before we actually go into the tips on how to use the weapon, what you guys have to understand first, as it is by all means the most pivotal thing to grasp and comprehend, is the weapon's deficits, and its biggest deficit is one thing known as the bloom effect. The bloom effect is also known as ghost bullets, and no matter which way that you look at this thing, it doesn't matter because on console specifically, this is happening almost all the time, and it's the biggest case for the last word in particular. And for those of you that don't really know what the bloom effect or ghost bullets are, it's essentially the idea and the perception in which you're actually landing bullets, but the game isn't registering that those bullets are actually landing. The reason as to why this occurs is because on every single bullet being fired from the last word, there is a muzzle flash, aka bloom, and this bloom is then indicating towards the game that it's given it a brief period of inaccuracy, and this inaccuracy is then causing you to perceive that you're actually landing bullets when in reality you're not. On PC, this effect is not found at all, and that's one of the reasons as to why for the game footage of the last word and then on the PC, you're seeing that this thing is almost the definition of godly, because it doesn't matter whether or not you're actually aiming down sights or you're hip firing, the bloom effect is literally not there. But on console, it's an entirely different story, and for those of you that don't believe that the bloom effect actually exists on console for ADSing and hip firing, oh boy, do I got a surprise for you, because here's some perfect examples of this thing existing 110%. As you guys are about to see, here's that first example of the bloom effect in a hip fire version. I'm not going to say anything else because I want you to experience it for yourselves firsthand. There it was in real time. And my friends, that is truly the definition of what the bloom effect is. And if you're like me, you're probably thinking to yourself, what the heck did I just witness? Because I can't believe what I literally just saw. What I want you guys to pay attention to here is the weapon's reticle, and in particular, how it's transferring from red to white. And for the vast majority of these shots, I actually only hit 4 of them, but in reality, I should have hit every single one. And that's because as I'm firing the weapon, you're going to notice that the reticle is turning red. And at the same exact time, there is the bloom effect with that muzzle flash happening at precisely the same moment. Deislayers, I don't know what more proof I can give you other than this right here, as it demonstrates to you right before your eyes that this is the definition of bloom in all its glory, and it's the definition of muff cabbage trash shenanigans. As I zoom in on the reticle itself a little bit further, you're going to see why I'm even more frustrated, and that's because you can actually physically tell that those bullets, maybe 1 is actually missing, but the rest of the 7 are certainly landing almost every single time, or at least they're perceiving to be, and that's because of that red reticle in association with the bloom. But I also want you to notice that that red reticle should be getting smaller, but in actuality, it's getting bigger. And that's because, once again, I'm not proccing the Fanfire perk due to the bloom effect and these ghost bullets. After witnessing that, I have no doubt in my mind that you guys are firm believers just the same way that I am, and that the bloom effect already exists whenever you're actually hip firing. But what about when you're aiming down sights? This, my friends, is the next question that we have to answer. And to show you that it certainly does exist even when you're ADSing is exactly what I'm going to show you right here with another example. As you guys can tell from right here, I'm already ADSing and I've completed the engagement in real time. But what I'm going to do is rewind this again and, just like last time, play it in slow motion along with real time so that you guys can actually see what happened, in the sense that I actually stopped firing the bullets because of the fact that I thought I had already downed that Guardian, but in reality, the ghost bullets once again had kicked in, and thus I had to finish the Guardian off by once again aiming down sights, and then finally I get taken out from a Guardian in the back. In the first half of this engagement, everything goes according to plan, no problem whatsoever. But as soon as I happen to get to around, say, 4 or 3 bullets left in the magazine, that's when all hell breaks loose. And once again, ghost bullets kick in. And that, my friends, is another huge frustration of mine, because this simply should not be happening. The good news here is that we actually have a couple of techniques to prevent this bloom effect from happening when we're also aiming down sights, as well as when we're hip firing, and so I'm going to get into that in the next couple of tips. One of the biggest assets that the Last Word has going for it is the fact that this thing right here can compete with the Not Forgotten as well as the Luna's Hell hand cannons. And the reason why this is so important to note is because this thing actually has an optimal TTK at 0.53 seconds. And even if you don't happen to get that, it can still have a body shot TTK with only 4 bullets, and that is still exceptional at 0.8 seconds. Clearly, this thing can do some work, but the way in which it's meant to be utilized first and foremost is with a hip-fire mechanic. And the reason that we all know this is because of its very unique and exotic perk called Fanfire. Fanfire states that this weapon can be fired quickly and continuously. In addition to this, it also gives the weapon faster reload and increased accuracy on successive hip-fire damage. Essentially what this implies is that as soon as you happen to get one shot via hipfire, you're supposed to be able to then not only get a faster reload, but also have an increased accuracy. And although this increased accuracy is happening, it is very, very minor, and ghost bullets are certainly still going to happen on a very frequent basis. But despite that, what we can do to actually counteract this is a technique that I like to call centering your target. Pretty much what this technique is it's training yourself never to fire a bullet unless you absolutely know for 100% certainty that that Guardian is directly in the center of your screen and that your hipfire reticle is perfectly lined up with that Guardian before you ever take your first shot. Having the patience to actually not panic, and then to be able to recognize that the reticle has turned from white to red, indicating that that reticle is actually directly smack dab on the enemy Guardian, that is by all means the most difficult thing to do. But once you understand that and mastered it, the centering your target technique is almost always going to guarantee you that very first shot to land, and thus you're then going to be able to proc Fanfire, get that increase in accuracy, as well as that increase in reload speed. The more that you proc, more hipfire bullets. To see an example of this, here I am going up against a Guardian who actually has the Jotun, and just before I actually take my first shot, lo and behold, you see my reticle turn from white to red. And then instantly, as soon as I have that, I then take my first shot and then continuously fire in a full auto format to thus absolutely eradicate that Guardian to the nether realm. I want you guys to pay attention to how in particular I am strafing left and right, which is then correlating to me traversing in a direction that my enemy Guardian is not, while at the same time still making sure that that hipfire dot is actually not moving even though my body actually is. Clearly, I was able to outmaneuver the Jotun simply by number 1, strafing, and number 2, making sure that my hipfire accuracy was right on point by that initial concept I mentioned from earlier, and that is centering your target. After witnessing that, I have no doubt that many of you are probably asking yourselves, well Xander, this isn't going to apply to all scenarios, because a lot of times Guardians are going to be going in one direction, or they might have verticality, and so all these things can certainly apply, and to you I would say that you're smack dab on the money and have hit the hammer on the nail. Thus, to counter a Guardian who has massive elevation or who is traversing in one direction and one direction alone, what we can then apply next while hip firing is leading the target. This technique is once again very simple, and all you have to simply do is just make sure that your hipfire reticle is slightly ahead of the direction in which the Guardian is actually going. Because what a lot of you don't understand is that the last word has a little bit of a delay from where the reticle actually is and to where the bullet is going to travel. And so if you shoot where a Guardian currently is, that bullet may not actually land. And so in actuality, what we have to do is we have to anticipate ever so slightly of where they're going, and thus the bullet is then going to actually hit exactly where that person is going to be instead of where they currently were. Just like from before, I'm going to show you guys an example of this, so don't worry, I've got your back, I'm not going to leave you hanging. And so as you guys can see, here's a slightly different engagement where our golden gun is coming directly into the room, and I'm actually traversing in this pattern of where I'm predicting / anticipating where he is going to be. The main thing that I want you guys to take away from this is that initially, I was actually traversing my target perfectly, but then in the middle of the magazine, say once again around that 4 or 5 bullet marker, that's when I was actually leading behind that person, and thus my bullets were missing. But to actually counteract this, in the latter half of the magazine, I once again was leading my target, and as you guys could tell, that last and second to last bullet connected down in that golden gun, just like that, no problem whatsoever. Deislayers, you've heard me say it before, and I'll say it again. This right here is the definition of anticipation without hesitation. That mindset is exactly what this technique is applying, and so if you can master this time and time again, not only will the mass majority of your hipfire shots have a significant chance of actually landing their target, but furthermore, you're thus then going to be able to center your target on top of that, and with these two techniques combined, you're going to be able to absolutely demolish and eradicate so many Guardians, making them feel a little bit salty. The very next tactic that I want to discuss is how you guys can use this thing in the second method, and that's by aiming down sights, also known as ADSing. But before we do so, we actually have to take one step back and go into a private match, understand the mechanic that I'm about to show you first by hip firing, and then second by aiming down sights. Because once you grasp it by hip firing, not only is it going to help you in that category, but furthermore, it's then going to help you in the second category, and that is of course, ADSing. As we go into this private match, you're going to notice that I'm on Eternity just simply standing up against the wall. And here, I'm just hip firing without having any kind of control on my actual controller, and you all can clearly tell that this thing's recoil is actually quite drastic when you're hip firing. Now as we aim down sights, this is going to be even more severe, and once again, you guys can see that it's going skyrocketing up into the roof, and this, my friends, is a definite no-no and something that we want to avoid at all costs. How we control this astronomical and insane recoil is something that I like to call joystick jab. There is a marvelous symbiotic relationship that you guys are going to notice between your actual sensitivity that you have, and in my case that's 9, and then of course the direction and how much that you have to pull via the tension on that right joystick down at approximately a 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock angle. Now if your sensitivity is around say 3 or maybe around 4, then you're going to have to pull down much harder on your right joystick, and to show this, here we are once again right back in that private match, and so as you guys can tell, I'm hip firing, but almost all my bullets are retained in a very small area, and that's because I'm applying this joystick jab. This exact same technique can be applied when you're aiming down sights, and almost the same way as before, we get very similar results. Although notice that the recoil control when you're aiming down sights is 10 times worse than what you would actually believe for when you're hip firing. If you were to ask me, this drastic recoil right here, especially when you're aiming down sights, is why the last word is so freaking hard to control. But with a little bit of practice and a little bit of patience, you will eventually get the symbiotic relationship that you need for this joystick jab technique. This is really going to help you reduce the amount of ghost bullets, and the way in which I can show this is via another example. As I play this particular example in real time, you're going to see that I'm using this exact same technique, but in order for us to really grasp how this thing is really functioning, we gotta rewind it and play it down in slow motion. You guys can actually tell that I 3-tapped this Guardian with exactly 3 critical headshots, getting that optimal TTK at exactly 0.53 seconds. But in order for this to work properly, I had to apply that joystick jab technique. And what I was doing constantly is I was pulling drastically, very severely on that right joystick at that 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock angle, so that it appeared as if the reticle itself was barely ever moving, even though I know for a fact that the recoil is significant. Despite the last word's drastic recoil when you are ADSing, the beautiful thing about aiming down sights is that it actually allows you to engage guardians at longer ranges and with more precision. But once again, this isn't something that you're going to get overnight, and so practice does make perfect if you want to be able to use the last word in a wider range of engagements and make it more versatile as well as more lethal. The fourth tip that I've got for you, my friends, is actually something that's a combination between that of the first two of ADSing as well as hip firing, and the last one that I'm talking about is called tapping the trigger. Tapping the trigger is very, very distinctive in contrast to that of both hip firing and aiming down sights, because in both of those two types of ideas of using the weapon, this one requires you to have a completely and totally different shot rhythm. With the other two that we've been discussing so far, you've been using the weapon most likely in a full auto format, and so you're holding down the trigger and trying to put as many holes as you possibly can into the enemy guardians, making them look like a wheel of Swiss cheese. As scrumptious and as so delicious that actually sounds, what might be more beneficial for you is to tap the trigger. And so what this is entailing is letting the weapon fire one bullet, reset entirely until its reticle is in the exact same spot that it previously was from when you just fired, taking another shot, and then repeating the process over and over again, while all importantly, resetting your reticle without fail. In a sense, you're actually causing the last word then to function like a wide variety of other hand cannons that currently already exist. And it can be a 110, it can be a 140, even that of a 150. And as long as it's firing in that exact same shot rhythm, that's when you're going to have this tap your trigger technique apply most beautifully, because not only is it going to give you much more precision, but on top of that, you're also going to drastically, and I truly do mean almost entirely, get rid of all ghost bullets or the bloom effect, because the bloom isn't going to affect this entire technique when you're resetting your shot. To see an example of exactly what I mean, here we are in this fantastic engagement, and this guardian is completely oblivious to my whereabouts, but as you guys just saw, I took a shot, reset, took a shot, reset, took a shot, reset. This is exactly what I want you guys to do time and time again, because it's going to make the weapon much more reliable. When a weapon is more reliable, it's more consistent. When it's more consistent, it can be used in a wide variety of engagements. And this premise is exactly what makes all weapons good in Destiny 2, regardless of whether or not it's the last word, the Lunas, the Not Forgotten, a pulse rifle, an SMG, a sidearm, a scout rifle. It doesn't matter, as this exact same overall idea applies to every single weapon that you can possibly imagine. Now, what a lot of Guardians don't realize is that you can actually use this tap the trigger technique in conjunction with saying full auto via hip firing or once again aiming down sights. And the key thing that you have to take away from this is recognizing as to which range engagement that this technique or that technique is going to be most beneficial in. The only way in which you're really going to master this is practice, practice, practice. But just so that you guys can actually see a very distinctive difference in the weapon's shot rhythm when you're doing a full auto version or a burst version, in contrast to that of a semi-auto or tap the trigger version, I'm going to play an engagement with the volume raising the roof. As you guys just heard, that distinctive difference in shot rhythm and or the shot pacing is exactly what you guys have to be aware of, because that's then going to dictate as to all the range engagements in which you can use a wide variety of these techniques. And it doesn't matter whether or not it's tapping the trigger or it's actually aiming down sights by centering your target or leading your target, as well as that of actually aiming down sights and doing full auto, so then that way you guys will have a wide arsenal of tools to choose from and obliterate any muff cabbage munchkin who stands in your way. Having said all these things, I think that you guys now have a very solid and thorough grasp and understanding as to how this thing is meant to be utilized in a wide variety of situations. In a sense, you can kind of say, I'm Batman. Because if you wanted to, you could do a wide variety of things since you have that toolbox and toolkit to use the different tactics and techniques for whether or not you're hip firing, you're aiming down sights, or you're tapping the trigger. And as long as you're keeping this overall concept of shot rhythm in mind, I guarantee you that no matter what kind of range engagement that you guys happen to find yourself in, the last word is certainly going to be somewhat consistent as long as you're applying these techniques to reduce the effect of ghost bullets, aka the bloom effect. With that, I'm very intrigued to hear all your guys' thoughts on this topic down in the comment section below, as I want to hear whether or not you guys agree with my tactics, you disagree, you like them, you don't, and no matter what your idea or preference or opinion is, I can guarantee that it's always going to be respected without a doubt. Lastly, be sure to watch the newest, check the latest, and share, comment, like on social media because you are the greatest. That's pretty much all I've got for you as of right now, Deislayers. And as always, GG TNT.